Está no ar o Produtor Quer Saber, que hoje vai tratar do tema como mitigar os problemas da agricultura relacionados à mudança climática, apresentado não só aqui no Brasil também, mas nos Estados Unidos. E para falar sobre esse tema, eu converso com Charles Rice, ele que é professor de agronomia da Universidade de Kansas, do estado de Kansas, nos Estados Unidos. Really nice to meet you. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
It's great to be here.
Ok. The first one, vou fazer a primeira pergunta para ele então, relacionado a por que o agricultor ele deve usar a tecnologia para justamente minimizar os problemas relacionados ao clima. Why do the farmers have to use the technology to mitigate or decrease the effects of changing weather?
Okay, that's a good question. So what we're seeing is that with our changing climate, that our weather is becoming more variable. And so we get more extreme events. For example, we get heat, high periods of temperature that can sterilize the pollen and decrease yields dramatically. In addition, we're getting more variable precipitation or rainfall events. And so the change is happening so that we're getting more heavy precipitation, rainfall events. That's causing more erosion and more flooding downstream. But it also means there's less precipitation between those events. And so we end up with dry periods between those heavy rainstorm events. And that really hurts the growth of the crop and makes it more challenging to grow those crops.
What's the main challenge that you could tell us?
Sure. Well, so you might have, for the heat, you might have a great crop, and this has happened in Kansas, in the U.S., that we had a great crop because vegetatively for corn, maize, it was growing great, but then the temperatures reached 38, 40 degrees centigrade right during pollination or tasseling. And that's a critical temperature. Once it gets about 34, 35 degrees centigrade, the pollen becomes sterile. And so you end up with a great looking corn plant, but no kernels on the ear. The other case is with variable rainfall, is that when it becomes dry, it may be too wet to plant, and then you have to plant later, and then that pushes us into dry periods or hot periods that slows down corn growth or plant growth. And so with that variability, it makes it hard to try to decide which crop, which variety to plant, also how to manage that crop as far as nutrients and water is concerned.
Perfect. And how to use technology to deal with this changing of weather? For example, temperature, foggy weather, rainy weather, and in case of the United States, sometimes snow.
Right.
Not
well,
not very common in Brazil, but how to deal with this changing?
Yes, great question. So the high temperatures are really hard to deal with because they can only, if they occur during a window of 2, 3, 4 days, that can sterilize the pollen and decrease yields by more than 50%. So we really have to use technologies like genetically engineering or improved plant breeding to help plants to handle heat stress. And we can also do that with drought stress too, but I think there's some more options to handle the weather associated or the weather associated with dry periods or drought or too much water. And so the technologies there are using sensors in the case of irrigation, using sensors to in the soil, so the farmer can decide when to irrigate and how much to irrigate. And that's important because one, you don't want to over irrigate because that means you're wasting water and it costs energy to pump and put that water on the field. And then also if you put too much on, you can leach or move nutrients below the root zone, and so you've wasted your fertilizer. And so adding the right amount, the right time of water is critical, and these new technologies that will help measure soil moisture so you know how much and when to apply. The other case would be as far as technologies, and again, it's associated with big data, but as we get more information on weather and be able to predict weather for the short season, we're not there yet, but there was a case in Colombia where they took 50 years of data, weather information, and said, okay, in March, the trend was it was going to be a wetter year and more favorable for a certain type of variety of, in this case it was rice. And so they told the farmers, the consultants with this weather information said, you should be planting this time with this variety. And they got lucky, and it turned out that the trend that they were anticipating, it happened. So they ended up increasing their yields by 50% by changing the variety and changing the planting date to meet that weather condition that what they thought was going to happen. So it was tremendous success. So as we get better at understanding weather trends, hopefully we can give farmers better information, and so they can change varieties, you know, a month before planting. They can decide when to plant, and that will greatly increase yields and profitability.
Why did you say lucky? Isn't it 100% right when the farmer is following the technology, or we can have some mistakes sometimes?
Right. Well, weather is extremely hard to predict. And so what they were doing was the probability that, okay, if I had this condition, there's a 75% chance that this was going to happen that year. But there's also a 25% chance that it might not happen. So it turned out that they recommended and they got that 75% match. But it could have been another example where there was it could have been where the chance of it happening was 75%, but it was that 25% that it didn't happen. So we still aren't perfect, and so it's still a challenge. But hopefully, with more information, we can get better at advising farmers in a short time period. The long term, we know, at least some of the projections on climate, is that we're going to get hotter in certain parts of the world, and certainly parts of Brazil will get warmer, particularly the northern part. And it depends on where you are. Southern part of Brazil, if I remember right, the trend is to get wetter, but it'll be more variable. And then Amazonia will get drier. That's the long-term projection. So that's happening in the United States as well. In Kansas, the western part of the state is getting drier. So we're starting to tell farmers, well, maybe 25 years or 10, 25 years down the road, you need to be thinking about different crops. Instead of growing irrigated corn, maybe you should be growing sorghum or wheat, something that demands less water, that can handle the heat.
Ok. Nós vamos para um rápido intervalo e na sequência vamos continuar com a segunda parte da entrevista com o professor Charles Rice, ele que é professor de agronomia da Universidade do Estado de Kansas, nos Estados Unidos. Estamos falando a respeito de como usar a tecnologia para mitigar os efeitos das variações climáticas. O produtor quer saber, volta depois do intervalo.